Before we start this episode, we would like to thank our sponsors. The first one is Progress Telerik. They have amazing Blazor UI controls with over 95 components. So if you need something, they probably have it. Check them out at bit.ly/BlazorUI.
And our next sponsor is If Insurance. And they want to decrease injuries in society and need your help crunching historical data with .NET technology to predict the future. Their tech community is over 900 people and they are growing like never before. And you can check them out at bit.ly/ifdev.
But now, let's continue with the show.
Welcome back to Coding After Work podcast. We are recording this episode in person.
We are!
At NDC London.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First in-person conference this year, I believe.
It is. And it's so good to be back. Yeah. And it's so fitting that we are at NDC.
Why?
Because our guest made an announcement at another NDC back in the day.
See what you did there.
Yeah. So today's guest is Steve Sanderson. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Thanks for chatting with me.
Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I am a software developer. I've been in the industry for 20 years now, and I have worked on a bunch of web-related stuff in that time. I think I started my career on web forms with VB.net and in a small startup, and I've probably followed most of the Microsoft web technologies through that period. I've worked at Microsoft since 2010, and I've been on the ASP.NET team for the last few years, and particularly been focusing on Blazor.
Nice.
Now, we talked about Blazor before on the show, but perhaps you can do the elevator pitch?
Sure, yeah. Well, Blazor is a UI framework for .NET. It was originally started when we realized that we could run .NET in a browser on WebAssembly, and being a UI guy, my first thing to do with any new technology is build a UI framework. So that was a fairly natural thing to follow. But Blazor is not really about WebAssembly specifically anymore. It can run in an incredibly wide range of places. It also runs on server, has done for a long time. So your .NET code runs the UI on a server and streams the UI updates over WebSockets. And as of this quarter that we're in right now, Q2 of 2022, it's going to be possible to use Blazor to build native desktop and mobile applications as well, thanks to the Maui project, which is about to be released. So yeah, Blazor is a UI framework and it runs in a wide range of platforms. Nice.
So you mentioned WebAssembly. There are a couple of questions that always comes up when you talk about that, and one is Webassembly the new Silverlight?
Okay, well, WebAssembly is not controlled by any company. It's a standard that is defined by web standards bodies and by all the major technology vendors that produce browsers and operating systems. So it's not really within anyone's power to discontinue it in the same way that Silverlight was basically discontinued by Apple. And so, no, I don't think there's any particular reason to make the comparison. The only connection is that they're both browser-based UI frameworks from Microsoft. But beyond that, there's no specific reason, I would say, to make a connection between those two things.
I always get that question.
Yeah.
Every talk I do, every workshop I do, is this the new Silverlight?
Yeah, I think it's the natural hesitation of people adopting new technology because it might cost them a lot of money. Or time and effort, or code for that matter. But I think hearing it from basically the source, we can maybe calm that.
Yeah. Well, if you're asking me this question 3 years ago, then perhaps at that time it would be a person who was feeling cynical could say, "Oh yeah, you say this, but Microsoft could just kill it at any minute, couldn't they?" Yeah. And that probably would have been true 3 years ago. But at this point, there's so much investment in it, both inside the company and outside, that it's kind of gone beyond what a single team controls now. And obviously it's always been open source, so theoretically another group could maintain it if desired, but there's no reason to think that would be relevant. If anything, Microsoft is just increasing its investment in this as the years go by.
My boss said to me, or asked me, So do you think that Blazor could go away? Is this something that other companies are investing in? I mean, we know that Microsoft do, but do other companies do that as well? So I simply told him that there are huge Swedish companies that are investing in this, companies that you heard of. It's really not a question about that anymore, I feel. Some other people worry about download size, and now I know that you've done a fair amount on that side.
Yeah, so certainly one of the drawbacks, it would be fair to say, about running .NET on WebAssembly in a browser is that you do have to download the .NET runtime in order for your application to start up. We've done tons of work to make that as small as possible, and as of the current releases, the tooling is able to strip out a lot of code from the runtime if it can detect that it's not going to be used. The smallest Blazor WebAssembly applications now around 1 megabyte, and the .NET runtime part of that is about 360 something kilobytes compressed, which is pretty phenomenal, really, that we've got the whole .NET runtime down to the size of like a JPEG. So, I don't think there's very many web applications these days for which that would be prohibitive, but it certainly is a thing to think about. And certainly Blazor has always been optimized mostly around business application type scenarios. And if you think of anything that your staff is going to use, if they have to wait, I don't know, like 300 milliseconds for the app to start as opposed to 30 milliseconds, is that going to change anything about your business use case? Probably not. So yeah, I would say that there aren't very many reasons beyond purely theoretical reasons to consider that download size to be problematic these days.
So one question I got last time when I did my workshop is that with WebAssembly, we do have a larger download size. But let's compare with Facebook. I believe they have about 20 megabytes of JavaScript, pure JavaScript to download. So if we would do like, let's say Facebook, now that's a silly example perhaps, but if we would do that in WebAssembly, would that be larger or smaller?
Well, who's to say? So that 20 megabytes of stuff, like it's all doing something. They didn't put it there for no reason. And they would need some equivalent to all of that stuff. Now, whether that code could be more compact expressed as .NET or not, I really couldn't predict that. But what we can say is that the overhead of Blazor WebAssembly in that case would be basically negligible compared with everything else.
And I think the strength of Blazor is that you can use your back-end C#.NET knowledge for the browser if you want.
Absolutely.
Kind of amazing. And you are swearing a lot less. Looking at you, Jimmy. You don't have to do JavaScript.
Less JavaScript in my life. So it's possible to combine Blazor with other technologies like Angular or React. When would you say multiple technologies in the same app is a good idea, and when is it not?
Well, I would say it's just a fact of life. It's not that people deliberately set out to say, I would like to build my app as an interesting hybrid of Angular, React, and Blazor. Like that would be an odd way to go about your business, maybe good for job security. But no, the reality of people's businesses is that they start with one technology and they start to migrate to another, or they've got multiple divisions within their business that make different technology choices, or they choose to acquire some technology or buy a license to use certain things that are built with different technologies. And so it is just a normal aspect of reality that you do have to deal with multiple languages, multiple UI frameworks, and so on. And so our goal on the Blazor team is just to maximize flexibility. Really, we want to make sure that if you are building an Angular or a React application, then you can use Blazor inside it. But also the opposite as well. If you're building Blazor and you want to reuse some of your React components, then that should absolutely be possible as well.
I really like that. One part of me would love for Microsoft just to tell me this is the technology you should use and use that. And the other part of me is like, use whatever you like and it's just going to work together.
It's way more inclusive. And I think you can, if you have Angular developers working together with C# developers, they can still get along. They can still work on the same product. There's no conflict. And I think that's very powerful and very inclusive. Use whatever you're good at.
So I don't know if you can share these kinds of numbers, but from what I see, all the companies that I talk to, they are running Blazor server. Not all of them, but many. Most companies are running Blazor server. Do you know if we're looking at a larger customer base, is people leaning towards WebAssembly or server?
That's an interesting question. I don't really have any statistics either way about that, but I can certainly relate to what you're saying just on a sort of anecdotal basis, that Blazor Server has found a lot of popularity in large businesses, probably even more so than I would have guessed when we were building this thing in the first place. It's the kind of story that people tell us is primarily to do with productivity. Like, I would have thought it was something like, oh, we want to keep our code on our servers and things like that, but I don't really hear that much. I mostly just hear, our developers just get a lot more done in their day when they don't have to think about stuff being either server-side or client-side. Like, they don't make that distinction anymore. You don't have to set up API endpoints for everything that you're trying to do. And many of the security concerns that you would have to plan for just sort of evaporate because the end user can literally not do anything apart from what the UI shows them. So it's that kind of productivity, I think, that keeps large businesses wanting to use this technology. And I'm obviously very happy about that. I've got no particular desire to push people to any one flavor rather than another. So yeah, that's great.
.NET 7 is coming in November.
Yep.
What's your favorite new feature?
Yeah, well, .NET 7, we've got a lot of things that we've considered on the roadmap. We're actually very early in the implementation process for all of that stuff right now, because the team has been really focused on the Maui release, which is just about to come out, and they're only just starting to switch on to a .NET 7 focus right now. So it might be that actually we've got relatively little time compared with a normal .NET full release cycle. We might end up with a slightly smaller set of features than we did for the, say, .NET 6, like if you ignore Maui, which is itself massive. But some of the things that we've got on our roadmap as candidate features includes certain WebAssembly specific features, such as enabling multi-threading, because modern browsers have enhanced their WebAssembly support so that it now does allow multi-threading, and we want to bring that into .NET. We are also looking at improving the AOT compilation story. Today it's an all or nothing thing, like you AOT compile everything or nothing, and what we hear from a lot of developers is that they just want to AOT compile the most performance critical code paths only, maybe just a single assembly, for example, and that would save them time during build because you only AOT compile a small thing. It would also result in smaller apps being deployed, so that would be a great thing. We've got also various features that are not specific to Blazor WebAssembly. We're looking at, for example, possibly putting in a very minimal and lightweight grid into the framework by default. Now, obviously, there are lots of open source or third-party control vendor grids that already exist, and we're not trying to replace any of those. We would simply be providing a very bare bones but high performance starting point for grids. So someone who wants to build a more advanced one with like column reordering and stuff like that, well, they could build it on top of this if they wanted to. What else? I'm sure there's many others, but my mind is not full of things. Oh, just some simple things as well, like even just like the project template. I feel that sort of blue and purple design might have run its course by now.
Do we get an empty template?
The empty template,
yes.
That's one of the most highly requested features. But why? Why don't you want a counter and a weather forecast page? Everyone needs a weather forecast page. What are you building if it doesn't have a weather forecast? Yeah, so an empty template will probably be in there as well.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
That was the...
No, actually, I was a little bit more excited about the ahead of time compiling, that you could do the partial compiling, but this is also right up there.
So I have a thought, when it comes to WebAssembly multi-threading, how would that work on browsers that don't support that part?
That's a great point to bring up. So historically, or like for the whole time that Blazor WebAssembly has been a thing, WebAssembly has only really meant one thing. Like there's just been one version of WebAssembly that all browsers have supported equally. And so we've never really had cases where a feature would work in one browser but not another, or that you'd have to do some kind of runtime feature detection or anything like that. And now the emergence of multi-threading it might be that by November, every browser that you are realistically going to see will support it. Like it's already there in Chrome and Edge, of course. Now, whether or not it's there in all the versions of Safari you need to support, that's going to be an open question for you. Like when you're, as a business, do you only support iOS 15 or whatever it is, or are you going to have to support back to iOS 12? I don't know, but which one you choose is going to depend, is going to influence whether something like multi-threading would work. So we are going to have to come up with some kind of mechanism for conditionally loading different builds of the runtime depending on which browser it runs in.
Right.
Now, that itself can be transparent to the app developer, so you don't have to think about that, but you will find that threading will either be there or not, depending on what the browser is. And we might choose to have some kind of build time thing where you have to opt into saying, I want to enable multi-threading, and I understand that it won't necessarily work everywhere, just to force people to understand what they're doing with that. Or it might be that we don't know. It's not been implemented yet, and we're going to have to be guided a bit by what the community says when we start to roll out previews of this and how people find it works in practice.
So I'm writing... Well, I've written a book on Blazor, and now we're working on the next version. And I kind of told them that, okay, so I'm not going to start writing anything .NET 7 until it's actually released, because I don't know what is going to come into that version. So that's it's good to know that we're we don't know it yet.
It's a good policy to take. You probably don't have to wait until November to see what will be released, because you can watch the GitHub repo and see what gets committed if you want to, and obviously follow along with the previews.
Right. So back in 2017, I believe, you showed off Blazor for the first time.
Yeah.
And we had Dan Roth on the show before, and he talked about what they saw from the audience and basically their jaws dropped and all of that. But what happened from your perspective, from when you came off the stage? What greeted you?
Yeah, okay, so I hadn't been working on the Blazor prototype for very long at that point. You know, it had only been, I don't know, a few weeks or something like that. But it came together very easily because I think that it was the right moment. The technologies had come into place. You know, Inscriptum was there. I'd got this very minimal .NET runtime that compiled to WebAssembly quite easily. And as is often the case with prototypes, where you don't need to make something production ready, you can just kind of like hack your way to success very rapidly. So I was able to get, even like there was a primitive version of hot reload, even in the very first prototype. So, you know, it was quite easy to make a demo look compelling, because, you know, it is compelling. You write C#, it just shows up in a browser, not even recompiling or anything. That's pretty cool. And the reaction was very positive. People were really wanting it. They wanted to understand if it really could be an actual thing. I think for most people, it would be the first example of WebAssembly being used to solve a problem that they actually cared about. So, you know, it was like the dawn of a new set of possibilities, not just for .NET, but for as WebAssembly being a thing that people would really use. I'm just talking about the people who were in the room there, not the whole world. So yeah, that was cool. I spent a bit of time with David Fowler and Damien Edwards right after the talk and showed them, because they hadn't seen any of it up until that point, and you know, they were very excited about that.
To say the least.
Yeah. Yeah, it was cool. I remember I demonstrated quite a lot of the features of it, and they were like, "Oh, this is all amazing." And then after about 10 minutes of showing them features, they said, "But how does it work?" And I realized until that point I hadn't even mentioned anything about the fact that, you know, it had been compiled to WebAssembly or anything at all. So, yeah, it was cool.
Nice. So you have a history of delivering amazing, mind-blowing talks.
Okay, thank you. Right.
So that almost answers my next question. Is that ever tough? Do you feel the pressure to deliver to that effect, or is it just something that happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody who does public speaking feels some pressure that, you know, you want to deliver something good for the audience. Critically, you don't want to have everything go wrong while you're standing on stage and feel like a fool. Yeah. But also, yeah, there's certainly a level of meeting expectations there. I think during COVID, I did a lot less speaking because obviously the travel wasn't there, and I didn't find virtual presenting to be very good, to be honest with you. Yeah. I felt that the value from it as a speaker was extremely low. Now, I'm not saying there's no value for the audience, because they're still learning some some new stuff. But as a speaker, unless you get to interact with your audience, then it's kind of like, I don't know why I'm doing this live anyway. I could have just like sent them a video of me talking. It'd be the same thing. I did feel quite disillusioned with speaking during that period, and I ended up not doing very much of it. So I guess that's meant quite a lot of time has elapsed, and now things are starting to open back up. I do feel, I really want to come back and do more of this stuff, and hopefully have some good stuff to talk about.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You are known for doing Knockout.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a web framework.
Yeah.
And with Blazor, you kind of eliminated the need for writing JavaScript. It's not entirely true, but so did Blazor get born for your love for JavaScript because there's a lot of JavaScript going on in Blazor, or is it the C# world, or was it WebAssembly, or a combination perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, it's all of that stuff. So, firstly, it's important to remind everyone that Blazor isn't just like my creation. Like, there's many people that work to enable the technology behind that. There's a team of people who are working specifically on Blazor, but beyond that, there's also teams building the tooling for the compiler and the runtime and so on. So, there's a lot of people whose individual passions and skills give rise to what we have, and it's certainly not something that I have like controlled or owned all the time. But in terms of my motivation, well, I have always focused a lot on web front-end stuff. So I started my career, like I said, doing VB.NET, but even while I was doing that, I was really gravitating towards JavaScript and making rich UI in the browser. At that time it was called like ridiculous things like DHTML and all that kind of stuff. And it was basically, when the mouse hovers over something, we will make something appear or disappear, and it's just really basic stuff compared with what we do now. But I was always drawn to the interactivity and the richness of doing UI programming, and I've always loved the fact that JavaScript makes that really a quick development process. Back in the day, we didn't even compile our JavaScript code; we would just write it, and then it would be in the browser, and that was a good developer experience. It's got more complicated since then. But yeah, I guess my enjoyment of doing that stuff in the browser combined with my focus on .NET meant that this came together as a technology that combines all of those things.
I really love that. Well, a couple of weeks prototype, and you even have IntelliSense in Visual Studio working, and that was such a awesome demo. I wasn't there though, but I rewatched the first presentation with Blazor, and it's really well done for being a prototype, just a couple of weeks work. Yeah,
well, like I said, the technologies were a really good fit for each other at that point. So in terms of making the IntelliSense work, which you mentioned, the Razor tooling team had already created all this extensibility stuff that made it relatively straightforward to do that. So, it's to their credit that they architected that in such an extensible manner.
Awesome. So with .NET MAUI, it's now possible to run Blazor basically everywhere. Was that something that you even imagined when you thought of Blazor in the first place?
Well, honestly, yes, because in a way, it's nothing new. This is the same pattern that has played out in the React ecosystem. So React was already a dominant force in web before Blazor came into existence, and React has a thing called React Native, which I'm sure most listeners will know about. It takes the same programming model and JavaScript and builds native UIs with it. And so it was very obvious that we could follow the same pattern with .NET. And from the very beginning of Blazor, it was architected to separate the component programming model and the update system and rendering and stuff from anything specific to do with browsers. So the actual core part of it has got no relationship to JavaScript. It's got no connection with WebAssembly. It's just a thing that is a general UI system. And so to use that within MAUI is a natural fit. And even in MAUI today, we're doing web-rendered UI, so it's not that different from typical Blazor. We do still have a prototype that precedes MAUI called Mobile Blazor Bindings, and that was an attempt to use the Blazor programming model to build native UI without any web rendering.
Right.
So you would have Blazor components to represent things like a native button and so on. So these kind of possibilities have been long anticipated and understood, and yeah, we're just slowly getting closer and closer to the, what we've been able to see all along.
Is mobile bindings going to come as a product?
There's no specific plan around mobile Blazor bindings right now. The people or the person who did work on that is now working on the Maui team, and he used to be my boss, a guy called Elon, a good guy. He's quite focused on making Maui really successful right now. It's possible that at some point he'll shift his attention back to that stuff, but I don't know. We would need to have a good business case for it, and I'd say you can't really have something like that in isolation now, because Maui exists as a concept. It would need to become part of a broader strategy, and so whatever it was, it would probably be a bit different to what it was a few years ago.
Yeah. So what is next? What are you working on now?
Well, I am continuing to work on Blazor, so I'm on a team of about 5 or 6 people who are quite focused on this, but I'm also looking at some other things that we can do in the .NET and web space in the future. And one area that's got me very interested at the moment is WebAssembly beyond the browser, so using WebAssembly for server-side programming. And I've been doing some explorations lately into how we can compile .NET to WebAssembly in a way that will run in a Wasi environment. So Wasi is a standard for running WebAssembly on a server. It stands for WebAssembly Server Interface. And yeah, some people are quite hyped up about Wasi, and they say it could change the way that we do our cloud-native programming. It could be a very lightweight alternative to containers, and it could allow code to run in smaller devices or on the edge of CDNs and so on in ways that people wouldn't have done historically. So I want to make sure that .NET is a really first-class participant in that space. We don't know if that space is really going to take off and take over the industry, but if it does, we want to make sure that .NET is there right from the start. The .NET developers are able to explore all these different projects that are going on in that space, and just be part of it.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah. Is there something that you're really passionate about that is not computer related?
I don't have tons of time that isn't work related, to be honest. I've also got kids who they've got their own things, and that obviously is a big focus of my life. My other hobbies are things like I've started doing gardening. During the COVID times, everybody likes to do homely sort of positive feeling stuff. So I've got my greenhouse, and I'm,
Nice.
growing my vegetables and stuff, which
What
is
are
nice.
you growing?
Well, just the stuff you normally would. So I've got like tomatoes, cucumbers, got some peppers. I started trying to grow melons this year, which
wow.
You wouldn't think would normally grow in Britain, but I found a variety which apparently comes from Minnesota. And so, if they can grow that, they can probably grow in the UK. So yeah,
That's exciting.
Yeah.
I want to know how that goes.
Yeah. But like as a software developer, of course, I just instinctively turn it into an optimization problem. So, like I'm, going to run some controlled experiments on which type of varieties grow the best, and we track them, and my kids have got involved. My kids are into Mario Kart, so they've made me print out little Mario Kart characters, and we've got a little one for each plant, so we refer to the plants as like Toad and Daisy and Bowser and stuff like that, and we're going to see which one wins the race to grow the most vegetables.
That's so cool. Do you have any plans on IoTing the things?
Oh yeah, okay. Well, I've thought about that a bunch of times. I do have a little like temperature and humidity sensor that logs data out in the greenhouse. I wanted to set up a time-lapse camera, but honestly it was just too much work to bother with. I suppose the ultimate would be setting up some kind of automated irrigation system that, measures the water levels and puts the right stuff in and uses some machine learning to like react to different conditions and, looks at the plant's leaves and decides if they need more nutrients and stuff. But honestly, I've got other things going on in my life, and so I'm not going to do that.
But you could do it in Blazor.
Oh, I could. You're right.
Then you could do it at your work time.
I could, yeah. Microsoft can pay me to optimize growing tomatoes, and they'll be very expensively produced tomatoes.
So that's the name of the episode, Optimizing Melons.
Yes.
That's what we're doing.
Yes. Well, tomatoes are getting more and more expensive, at least here in Europe. Their prices have doubled in just a few weeks.
Yep.
So it might not be as expensive.
No, you're right. In the apocalypse, I'm sure I'll be glad that I've got some small scraps of food left that I can trade for ammo and so on. So yeah, cool.
Yeah, and for ammo for the zombies, obviously.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of questions
Yeah.
we ask all our guests.
All right.
What was your first computer?
My first computer was a ZX Spectrum, 48K, rubber keys. I got that when I was 5, I think. Yeah. It wasn't the first computer I programmed on, though, because prior to that, my grandparents had got a Commodore VIC-20, and those things came with an instruction manual telling you how to program them in BASIC. And I remember making my auntie type in the code from the manual. Like, I couldn't really read or write, but like I could instruct my auntie to type stuff in. And, it just, like, I remember making something that produced this 2-frame animation of a bird flapping its wings in ASCII art. And that's probably where I got my start in this industry.
That's the same for you. You also, thanks to the ZX Spectrum.
Oh, really?
You're a developer.
Okay. Yeah.
That's how it all started. I remember I sat down. I got it from my parents.
Yeah.
I played around with my brother's computer before, and so I sat down, 10 print Jimmy, 20 go to 10.
Yeah.
That was the.
Yeah.
Now I'm typing in the air.
Yeah.
But I used way too many keystrokes because the Spectrum was like 10 or 20 go to 10 would be 5 keystrokes. Because go-to was one of them. So it was really...
I know, that level of productivity. We just need to bring that back into modern IDEs.
That's nice. And kind of like your, let's call it hello world, or testing a new framework or technology is doing the UI stuff. Jimmy does a ZX Spectrum emulator.
Oh, really?
So I have one for Blazor.
Everything. Yeah.
Oh, wow, cool.
Running .NET 7 AOT.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah.
Did you write any of the underlying stuff that executes the instructions yourself? Or is there...
Yeah.
Oh, you did, right.
So I bought a book about Z80 Z80 assembler.
Yeah.
Page 1. Let's see what happens.
Okay.
Page 2, and got all of that, and then I optimized it because some assembly instructions is easy to do in pairing and so. From scratch.
I can't believe it is running on basically full speed in the browser. It is. I know how many computations going on into that because I've seen it.
Yep.
I can't even.
It's really cool.
It's amazing. So you have that for a bunch of
did one for HoloLens.
Oh, yeah. For AR, for cameras?
Yeah. Well, Windows Phone, Windows 8.
Yeah. Meadow, I think you tried it on the Meadow as well. Yeah. But Blazor is by far the one that works best.
Yeah,
of course. All right.
So I think we already got the answer to the next one. What was the first language you ever coded in?
Oh, yeah, well, BASIC then, as you can tell. Yeah, I can't really remember where I went to after BASIC, though. I think it was a long time. Probably I was pretty much like a teenager, because I went through an Commodore Amiga phase as well, and there was like Amos and Blitz Basic and and things like that, and I guess I was doing BASIC for a long time, and I did Visual Basic when I graduated, so a lot of BASIC.
Cool.
And the most important question: Marvel or DC?
I don't know what either of them are.
Oh, okay, that's.
I mean, I do technically know what they are, but I'm sorry, but it just has never been a thing in my life. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be a thing that really existed in the UK. I mean, we had our own separate sort of whole independent universe of fiction and superheroes. And I think if you ask kids today, they would probably have strong opinions about that. But for someone growing up in the late 80s, early 90s or something, that just didn't feature in the UK culture.
Yeah, I think we had about the same in Sweden. We had different companies buying different things and rebranding it a little bit, but it still became a thing for me because Spider-Man.
Yeah. So if our listeners want to find you, where can they go?
You cannot find me. No one can find me. I live in a secret bunker, and no, you can find me on Twitter. I'm Steve Sanderson on Twitter. And you can find me also on GitHub. If you go to the ASP.NET Core repo on GitHub, then if you post stuff about Blazor, then generally I will see it, and as will the rest of the Blazor team, and we can interact with people that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been so much fun.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Coding after work. Coding after work. Coding after work. Coding after work.